Okay, so part two. First on to stage then, we're going to talk about AI's growing role in design and management of buildings. So welcome up to Tom and Ivo from Savills.
Morning all. I'm Tom Collins, I'm Digital Director at Hoare, and so really, I guess representing a view around AI's role in design in particular. Firstly, yeah, thank you for having me. This feels like new ground for me still. I've been with Hoare for about 5 years. It's my first opportunity working in the construction industry in general. And it's been a really fascinating journey, having coming from banking and fintech and a brief stint in renewable energy sector as well. So when I arrived with a remit really to focus on how might we improve the way that we deliver engineering design to our clients, I must admit I was shocked in many ways. Lots of good positives around the incredible talents, the knowledge, the expertise that we have in our business, but also the design processes and the tools being pretty, I guess, feeling like a bit of a step backward perhaps from other industries that I'd been in. And so I think one of the big reflections has been that actually design in our industry is really expensive, like pretty much everything else in our industry. It's an expensive place to work. It's high risk involved, big asset values, complex design challenges to solve. But thinking about it in particular from a design perspective, we have a fantastic approach in theory with the REBA stages. And so this idea of starting with a rough idea of what the building's going to be, all the way through, as you're all very familiar with, to detailed design that gets us to the real build, and then manufacturing and in use. The cyclical nature of it, I think we probably all would agree, is yet to be kind of fully explored and fully realised. And I think what we've also found is that the idea of iteration through a design from the basics through to a detailed technical design are probably less about iteration and more about rework, because again, design is expensive. So our experience that I think reflects the experience of so many of our peers is that the timescales we've got, the complexities we're dealing with mean we'd like to find an optimal solution pretty quickly and then develop it further, only to find that, of course, we're a complex supply chain. Other changes might come through from our peers, and we may find then that we've got to go back to the drawing board once more. So in reality, I think we end up in quite an expensive rework kind of situation. And the reason that matters, I think, particularly in the FM space, is we often end up designing effectively an iteration of what we think is the best outcome in terms of design, but isn't necessarily as rigorously kind of proven as it might otherwise be. So how do we move to that kind of better space? So coming on to AI, we're all excited about where it's going. Huge progress, as I'm sure, and apologies I arrived slightly late, so I missed some of the content this morning, but I think we're all pretty excited about where LLM in particular is taking us. So we've had a lot already around efficiency, productivity. Those are massive challenges in our industry, and we're right to focus on how LLM can really move us forward in that space. However, beyond that, we've got really big challenges that we face in design, but across the industry more generally, and I'm sure these will resonate with you. So in terms of material procurement costs, project viability, just getting buildings out of the ground, and then things like net zero carbon, ESG goals, all of these things are increasingly competing complexities that I'm sure you can all appreciate. In this space, I think this is where LLM is only going to move the dial so far. So there are other technologies in the kind of sphere of AI that I think are going to be particularly impactful in this space. So in particular, it can do things like, say, help source external data. So publicly available data might be able to inform design decisions. And so I'll give an example, in fact. So these are things we've been working on within Hoare at the moment. We've been using AI to help us get to a point where we can effectively model scenarios around daylighting, heating and cooling loads, and do it much faster than we could with full simulation packages. So the idea of purely relying on building really complex simulation models and then running multiple simulations, that's still A, expensive, and B, requires a specialist skill set. We're finding that instead of purely relying on simulation, and we still do a lot of simulation, we're also using AI to effectively create predictive models rather than full simulations. And we're doing that as well, using machine learning to optimize what we're doing around service zone layout, optimizing design and routing. We're already seeing some advances in this space, and I think we're really excited about the next few years and what that's going to bring us. But I guess we need to also be rooted in some of the challenges, and again, I'm sure some of these will have already been covered, but particularly in our space, there's a real challenge around unstructured data in particular. Again, what I walked into a few years ago that surprised me the most was that we're using Excel for so much. Excel's a great tool. It's in the wrong hands, it's very dangerous, you could say, in the sense that data gets spread all over the place. People use different calculations that they've perfected themselves. Project information might get stored on shared drives, on local drives. It's not necessarily in cloud storage. It's structured differently project by project and team by team. And finding design inputs, it can be really challenging. So we're also finding the nature of the relationships we have, the nature of the industry is that I guess some of our contractual requirements force us into quite a fixed mode of operating and a very fixed view of what deliverables actually are in design. I'm really excited about some of the conversations we've had with some of our key clients and contractors around, well, do we really need to deliver these kind of BIM level 2 3D Revit models, or could there be better ways of delivering design information to you? However, yeah, we're in this place because we've got poorly optimized tools as well. We've been drawn to 3D in a BIM world for a little while. You can probably relate to being offered expensive BIM models as part of the sort of FM package, and the value behind that is probably not commonly understood, may not even be there. So we see ourselves in a position where, yeah, the tooling needs to change as well as then the skills. So data skills in particular are a really, really important challenge. And I think that brings us more generally on to, and I think reflecting back actually on what Yvonne was saying in the last session around the risk of bias in AI. So, AI, by the way, we're working with Microsoft at the moment and also developing a partnership around data platforming, which we're really excited about. So this is not to disparage Copilot specifically, but and in fact, it's a great name for an AI tool. I think it sums up what it's meant to do really well. It's an assistant to your needs. You're still a decision maker fundamentally. A Copilot isn't necessarily a decision maker, but is running tasks for you and helping you and informing you. But it's only as good as its training. So you might remember the Microsoft paperclip, which I think a few people have likened Copilot to, and it doesn't know what it's doing. So it's really important that you've got a well-trained Copilot. And in the design space, that's quite challenging because not all information is out there in the public sphere. However, any business like ours at Hoare of a decent size is sitting on a treasure trove of design information that spans back potentially years. It's often in an unstructured state, but it's all there to be learned from. And so, where I see AI really being embraced in the design process is when we really pivot toward much more of an evidence-based approach to engineering design. I do think, and I think it's becoming clear that, and not to disparage any potential architects in the room, but building design is going to become more engineering-led. We've got real challenges around achieving efficiency in buildings to achieve net zero carbon outcomes. We have ever more complex requirements around use of the right materials, complex supply chains, the need for higher performing buildings fundamentally. And if we're going to do that, we can't rely on the sort of classic stack of guidelines from the industry, of standards that are well established. We're finding already if we stick perfectly to the letter of standards, we don't already achieve the outcomes the client needs. So we need to actually build an evidence base and use that in our design processes to sometimes challenge the standards where we need to, but even without, a really solid evidence base that is not just data, but it's data with insight, understanding, data skills on top, to then sit alongside traditional engineering skills, is where we end up in a much more exciting place where we've got the evidence base behind us to actually make bolder design decisions, perhaps strip out a level of material out of the building that actually turns out we don't need. So for example, we're doing this at the moment. We're working with a few partners to query large data sets at the moment around occupancy, air quality, people movement, energy usage, to look at actually, if we compare against the spec of those buildings, and we've got that too, what did the design say and what was that based on, and then how is it actually being used in the real world? And if we scale that model up far enough, we end up in a place where we truly become evidence-based. The key thing there then is, so we're talking about data, but actually this is where generative AI, machine learning, all powered by a data layer that is well thought through, well structured, and is orchestrating data sets of all sorts. We get to a place where we can iterate far more rapidly and more cheaply. So I guess the real summary goal, I think, for the industry as a whole in the design space, but certainly for Hoare, is that effectively, internally, we make design so much cheaper, in inverted commas, that not that we deliver really cheap design, but we deliver optimized design because we can now afford to design 1,000 times, not one time, because we can constantly iterate and learn, and we can optimize for specific client outcomes, which is the other really important bit. So we may, with only one opportunity to design once, decide, oh, well, it's going to be some trade-off of sustainability goals versus pragmatic view of cost. Well, what if we could get to the point where we could model the exact ideal point on various scales around design solutions that gives the ideal outcome based on your needs as a client? And those will be unique to you based on the planned usage of the building. So yeah, we effectively move away from a world in which we're sort of constantly designing very expensively and having to go back and rework, and instead we're in a really rapid iteration space where we are getting to a level of optimization that ultimately delivers much better design outcomes for our clients. And that's where I see AI really having a huge impact. So yeah, I want to hand over to Eva at this stage from Savills. Over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Just conscious of the time, but the way me and Tom tried to approach this particular part of the presentation was moving on from kind of the design side, and now we're into the operational stage. So going back a circle in terms of the conversation we had this morning, quite a lot of interesting points were raised today. I'll reiterate some of those again, but then touch on specifically what we're seeing from kind of Savills' perspective as a property manager or FM, of what's actually happening on our and kind of industry sites. But before I do that, what I wanted to do is set a bit of the perception of what the market perception is, what's the ambition. So we hear the usual hashtags, of the, well, I like to call them hashtags, of all the wonderful things we could achieve, right? Whether that's optimizing energy, achieving net zero goals, predicting space utilization, whatever else you might see on the board there, but we can probably extend that list by 100 or 200. But the reality really is, well, the key challenge is understanding the kind of realistic expectations versus overhyped potential. I really like that particular meme, or if you want to call it a GIF, because I think, oh no, it's not going to play, just a meme, is going back to that cherry on top, and some of the items that were mentioned by the previous presenters of the e-commerce boom, of the attaching the AI, and we're seeing a lot of that in the market at the moment. So if we know what the market perception is, so that's what we think we'll get to, that's the cherry on top, right? What is the current state of play? But before I jump into what is the current state of play, I wanted to make a clear differentiation in terms of when we talk about data. This is specifically at asset level. So the way we envisage is looking at static data. So that's everything, your O&Ms, your PDFs, if you're doing an occupier survey and you get some answers back, that's all static data. And then on the other hand, you have all the live data, so that's time series data. And what I mean by time series is repeated on a certain, let's say, every second, every 5 seconds, an hour, 24 hours, whatever it might be. So in this case, that'll be energy data, metering, building systems, whatever it might be. So we're seeing from AI perspective, we're seeing a big impact. Apologies, I keep looking at that, forgetting that I've got a screen here. So the biggest impact or the significant impact we see is with the static data. So your O&Ms, design information, or what Tom was alluding to. So all the physically static information that we obtain. Where we don't see too big of an impact at the moment is all the big hashtags that we address today is the live data elements. Now, there'll be loads of platforms and solutions out in the market that will tell us we're doing AI or platform X, platform Y, but we're not seeing full value of any practical AI implementations just yet. And that unfortunately positions, I'll get to that in a minute, that positions our kind of existing buildings are just not quite ready. The infrastructure's not there, and I'll touch on that in a second. But also new assets that we're seeing coming into our management still are not necessarily designed the same way, but the infrastructure that's installed within those is built on the same principles due to the way our contractual chains work. And again, really good picture, pays 1,000 words as always. That's what we're seeing in the market. So we're saying there's loads of AI from a live data perspective, but it's just statistics, right? Sometimes it might be really advanced statistics or simply if, else, or or statements. So 2 real examples of what we're seeing, how static data is being used, how we are utilizing static data. So a lot of assets, you'll be surprised, will have physical information. So physical PDFs, 700 pages of O&Ms, or where else it might be. Converting those into the digital solutions, we're utilizing AI to help us with that. Then once we convert them into digital versions, we're utilizing the static data to feed into our models to support our workforce through the static data. So they'll be simply engaging with a 700-page document just by ability to search certain items and engage with that document to support efficiencies on-site or also off-site. So that's the, oh, well, that's interesting. Let me just click through those. I probably should click near the mic so you can hear me clicking furiously constantly. Well, the point I was trying to make with this particular slide was, what are prerequisites? How do we minimize the gap between what's the ambition and what's the reality? And a lot of these points have already been touched on today. So firstly, we have the data quality and integration. I've also put infrastructure readiness. That's a really key part. So if we want to gain any live data side from our particular asset, we need to have the ability to actually do so. And I believe JLL alluded to that point quite well. Sorry, gentlemen from JLL, not JLL specifically. Talent and training, big item, and I'll combine that together with change management that you see on the right-hand side as well. There's always a bit of resistance in change when it comes to kind of real estate. Just for a bit of context, I'm ex-Hoare, so I've gone from a design into property management side, and I've noticed a lot more change management issues from a property management perspective. It's just we're kind of, to some degree, set in our ways. This is the way we do things. So there's a big item to overcome these issues. And regulation, I won't even touch on. So what's the future role? So summarising it all together, what's the future role for AI in building management or property management? It's the usual hashtags what I've started with the first slide, right? That's the ambition where we want to get to, whether it's operational improvements, ROI, sustainability, net zero items, and most importantly, probably the kind of the competitive advantage, which I hope I put on there. Yeah. Competitive advantage from an investor perspective. Justifying that, well, why do we need this in the first place? How is it going to create value and lasting impact? And the last thing that I wanted to, if I can go back, touch on, we're talking about AI like it's going to be this big, wonderful thing that we're going to integrate across the industry, is going to solve all our problems, as I kind of outlined in the first slide. But the hardest part for all of us as an industry is the what, how, why, and any of the kind of questions we want to ask for that particular topic, of understanding internally as an organisation, but that specific asset level of, well, why are we doing it? How are we going to do it? What we're doing about it? And that's me. Thank you.